just sharing what you've done today, and you don't have to go into all the details, but just in general, sharing that with anyone, friend, family, just a quick call, that helps you detach a bit from it, to not keep it all in. And I think that's really, really important. Very simple thing, simple trick to remember to please do when you deal with. They don't need saving. These people need access to tools, they need access to information, and they need opportunities to take action for themselves.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to In Sync. I'm your host Anmol Irfan, and today we're going to be bringing you a very inspiring episode. Our guest today is an award-winning human rights activist and entrepreneur who has worked with communities across the world. As part of the United Nations, the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and diverse legal teams, Rhiana Spring has defended the most vulnerable and spearheaded multinational human rights projects across 4 continents. And in 2021, Rhiana founded Spring Act, empowering people to take action and help eliminate global social injustices. Together with her team, they launched Sophia, the world's first chatbot empowering survivors of domestic violence to gather potential evidence and seek help in every country in the world. Rhiana, I am so excited to have you here, and I can't wait for you to inspire our listeners.
Thank you, Anmol. Right back at you. Such an inspiring journalist, and I'm happy to be here.
So let's get right into it. You do so much, and you are just such a dynamic powerhouse of a woman that I'm sure so many young girls and even boys will look up to. I think the first thing they'd want to know is what drives you, what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, what gets me out of bed in the morning is the insane injustices that persist in our world and the inspiring people everywhere who refuse to accept the status quo and take action. There's so much to do to create an equitable world for all, and it needs everyone. It needs you, it needs me, it needs absolutely everyone to roll up their sleeves and to do something about it. And that's exactly what gets me up and out of bed in the morning.
That sounds like a very good way to be inspired, but I'm sure it's not easy. You know, the work that you're doing, I'm sure you face a lot of emotional challenges as a woman. You work with survivors of domestic abuse. The field of human rights in general is quite emotionally exhausting, I'm sure. How do you protect your own mental health and well-being, and how do you navigate those challenges?
I'm really glad you asked, because I try and tell people that start in Spring Act that may not have worked in this field before, kind of how to protect yourself. We had training. We had actually a full day training on mental health and health in general before we got deployed with the UN. And so I'm really grateful that I had that, and very glad that I can speak about it here actually with that question of yours. So hopefully more people can take from this. So yeah, working with survivors of domestic violence is deeply meaningful. The hardest part is obviously hearing the stories of injustices that have been happening in their lives, and knowing that those systemic barriers still preventing many from getting the help they need. That's the hardest thing. There's so much in place that stops people from getting the help that they need. The work can feel frustrating, but not because of the people we are working with, but the world taking too much time to put the money where their mouth is. Violence against women is systemic and prevalent everywhere in the world, and yet not enough is being done to tackle it at the root causes. So in this work, I remind myself that I'm just here to help create tools and pathways. The real strength lies with survivors themselves. Their ability to rebuild, to fight the injustice, to keep going despite everything. That's what inspires me and keeps me moving forward. That perspective, alongside with, setting boundaries. You need to set boundaries for yourself and in this type of work, and taking breaks when needed. This is at Spring Act, we have actively mental health days. So I actively encourage and get people to take mental health days once a month, and seeing that taking breaks is actually a strength. And most importantly, being part of a loving community of friends and family allows me to do this work sustainably. So one of the most powerful things that I was taught in this pre-deployment training was, when you come home after a day of work and you've listened directly and worked directly with these communities affected, is don't keep it in. You're not alone. Even though you have not experienced those traumas directly, it can impact on you. So just sharing what you've done today, and you don't have to go into all the details, but just in general, sharing that with anyone, friend, family, just a quick call, that helps you detach a bit from it, to not keep it all in. And I think that's really, really important. Very simple trick to remember to please do when you deal with people that have had it really hard and are dealing with traumas themselves.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really great advice, and we sometimes forget the value of community, like you said. And I'm sure that you've seen community acts and community cultures in so many different ways, because you've worked with so many different communities across the world. What's been your biggest takeaway from all the work that you've done in helping so many vulnerable people across the globe?
Well, interesting that you say vulnerable people, because that's exactly, we term it differently. So it's people in vulnerable situations for us, because the most powerful lesson that I've learned is that people facing the hardest challenges are also the most resilient, most resourceful, and most inspiring people that I have met. Whether it's survivors of domestic abuse, it's refugees, or it's, communities that are in vulnerable situations, in conflict or other, they don't need saving. These people need access to tools, they need access to information, and they need opportunities to take action for themselves. They know what they need very often. You just need to know how to get that help and need access to it. True impact comes from collaboration and not intervention, in my opinion.
I think that's a really great perspective to have, and one that I think a lot of advocate groups or even NGOs really need. And that makes me feel like there's a lot of overlap between the work that you've done in human rights with the UN or with legal teams, and with the work that you're now doing as an entrepreneur. Would that be correct? Are there any differences between those two experiences?
Yes. The communities that we serve still work very deeply in human rights. And so the communities that we serve and the human rights abuses that we try and tackle are similar, or in that way there's a lot of similarities, but the work couldn't be more different. I usually explain kind of what Spring Act is in the startup. It's a non-profit organization, but a bit run like a startup in comparison to the UN or multilateral organizations in general, is that you got to imagine the UN is this massive container ship. It's bringing all these resources and all this knowledge and all this help or support to people around the world. But it's slow. It moves slow, and to change directions of a big ship like that, it can take hours, it can take weeks, an actual ship. Whereas a startup, we're more like speedboats. We're zapping around. We can't carry maybe as much load as the big container ships, but if we need to change direction, we can do that this second. And I really believe it needs both. You need long-term support that thinks, like the UN can think 10 years ahead and has the funding and has all this knowledge and this big system. But it also needs these small speedboats like we are to bring in new ideas. So for example, technology is very slow to adapt in the NGO sector, whereas we can, something new comes out and we can adapt quite quickly. Another thing that I briefly mentioned is, of course, the funding is massively different. For me, it's very different to be on kind of the other side. I've worked for the UN and the Swiss Foreign Ministry where, funding is not an issue. Funding is internally an issue. Do we get this project from there, etc.? But you don't really think about funding. It's there. But with a nonprofit like ours, funding is the biggest issue. Where do we want to work long term? We have a 10-year strategy to bring Sophia, a chatbot, to every single country in the world. So if someone, if we manage to get the funding in for those 10 years, we can just breathe and plan and work long term. At the moment, the way the nonprofit world unfortunately works is people give kind of small to medium grants, more or less, for project-based work rather than organizational long-term. And well, last but not least, I would say this is more kind of on the operational side, a big difference between working in an institution or even a big company and a startup is I wear so many hats. So, a CEO of a director of the UN or a CEO of a company, she more or less, she's the CEO and that's kind of what she does, which is, hard enough. But as a founder, you're the CEO, you're the CFO, you're the head of HR, I was head of the tech team for a while, I was head of communications, I'm an intern, I go and stamp the letters and bring them to the post, all the way up to making, massive strategic decisions and everything in between. So that's a core difference in then more on the operational level. But in as a whole, the work in the South is similar in the sense that we just want to help or support individuals through really tough times.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a lot of hats. I mean, kudos to you for managing all of that.
Thank you. It's been a journey.
I'm sure, and especially in the space that you are, where you're bringing together AI and tech and advocacy, so like you said, advocacy is often very slow especially in bigger organizations, whereas the tech world is moving at this crazy rapid pace. What inspired you to bring both of these together, and how can more people really learn about the benefit of intersecting these spaces?
This happy accident, I never want to work in a different field. I think it's fascinating bringing human rights and technology together, and the impact is incredible. It all started when I was stationed in West Africa, in Senegal, with the UN, and I had refugees come to see me. I was working at the United Nations Office for Human Rights, and they came to see me, and they had come to see my predecessor and their predecessor and their predecessor for 5 years. And one of these refugees was Lua, who had a daughter named Emmanuel, who was not being able to be put in school because they had fled so many wars that she was technically too old for the level in school that she should be in. And that technicality had stopped her from going to school for 5 years. And quite honestly, I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do. I was neither a mother nor was I, native to the country where we were in, and I didn't know what to do because I tried to advocate within my organization, but this wasn't the mandate. So I went to the UN refugee organization and they couldn't do anything, and I tried to help and knock on doors, but they were all closed. And then I went for lunch with a friend from the Swiss embassy who knew the system really well in Senegal. And I kid you not, within one weekend, she had found 3 solutions. And within the month, Emmanuel was in school. And this only by chance that they came to see me, and by chance that I went to lunch with this person, that this issue was solved. And for me, that was just not okay, that someone's future, someone's potential is left up to chance. So I started creating a bridge between the people in vulnerable situations that needed help, and like I said, very often know what help they needed. The father knew what they needed, and the organizations that are there and exist to help them. And it was a journey. First, I wanted to open up kiosks around the country with big computers that you could go and ask for help. Then it was going to be a website with a directory. Then it was going to be an app. And then this was about 4-ish years ago, I learned about chatbots. I'm like, oh, this is chatbot. This doesn't need any data. It's easily accessible. So let's do this. And so I was developing this more broader technology, and then the pandemic hit. And with that, domestic violence rose so drastically that we pivoted and took this more broad technology and focused in on survivors of domestic violence and added this digital safe that would help them collect supporting documents of what was happening in their relationship. And with that, we hit a nerve of society, and the rest is history, basically.
It's amazing how one thing can lead to another, isn't it? Like how one instance can really just change the way you see progress or you see solutions.
Exactly. And for me, is all what human rights is about. You know, if you don't work in this field and you see the horrors of the world, a lot of people look away because it's overwhelming to see all this suffering at the moment in Gaza, in Congo. It's too much. When you work in this field, you see how you as this one small person can help this other one person, and you might not change the whole world, but you change their world. And that is what human rights is all about, because you don't know what is Emanuela going to do in the future. She might go on and save so many lives, and only because she was able to go to school finally. It's an incredible field to work in, and so privileged to be able to support these individuals.
No, that sounds really inspiring, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation right now. I feel like I'm learning so much, and I'm sure our listeners, especially anyone who's interested in going into this field, is learning so much. Would you have any advice for fellow human rights activists or advocates who are just getting started or who are thinking about taking the leap into this field?
Absolutely. I'm very actively a mentor for, especially young women that are studying or looking to go into the working world. So absolutely, very happy to share some advice that I wish I'd known when I was starting out. One is, start small, but start now. Like wherever you are in your journey, you can be you can be in high school, first year, or you're just starting out, or you're in the middle of your career and you want to change. Just start now. This is one of our advisors is Drew Dudley, and he has this beautiful book called This is Day One, and this is day one of the rest of your life. And if you don't manage today, tomorrow is your day one. Whatever it is, start now. The scale of injustices can feel so overwhelming, like I said, but real change happens through consistent and focused action. So you don't need all the answers. You just need the willingness to listen, learn, and take the next step. And it's important that you center the voices of those affected. So it's not about speaking for others. It's about creating space and amplifying voices that are often unheard, always working with communities, not for them. So I love the podcast that you have, is exactly, giving this space to different voices. And then I've got a few tips. So one important thing is to also pace yourself. And this is something I'm going to give as an advice. I wish I would take myself. I'm not very good at that yet. But, this is human rights work is a marathon and not a sprint. Burnout is real, and activism requires sustainability. So like I said before, set boundaries, find support, remind yourself that progress, even when it's slow, it's still progress. And, follow your passion. I think this is a type of work or field you go into when you're passionate about it. And so follow your passion and strengthen that passion with strategy. Impact comes from, I think, passion coupled with being smart, being adaptable, being strategic, to find your strength and collaborate and focus on solutions that drive, long-term change. But most importantly, and I'll end with this, most importantly, never underestimate your power. Never underestimate your power. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to something bigger. You just need to take one step.
Yeah, I think that is really great advice, especially what you said about burnout and making sure that your activism is sustainable. A lot of people, especially young people, just want to do everything right now. And that, I think that can just make it very hard for themselves, and then they find it very hard to stay in that space or keep going. Mm-hmm. But, from what you were saying about yourself, you sound like the kind of person who's always going. So tell us a little bit about what's next for you. I'm sure you have something in the pipeline.
Indeed. Yes. So we're on the cusp of launching an app called Comeback Cats. And so we're ramping up this in March during International Women's Month, because, you know, the world needs Sophia. Sophia is there 24/7, wherever you are in the world. If you're facing an unhealthy relationship, or you feel that there might be abuse involved, or you know that this is a domestic violence relationship, she's there. She hears you, she sees you, and she supports you. Sophia, however, it's going towards the symptoms of violence against women. And my passion lies with going towards the root causes. What are the root causes of violence against women? It's the gender stereotyping, and it's the objectification of women. And that's where we are now, that's where we're going and tackling with Comeback Cats. So Comeback Cats is an app that trains you with witty comebacks to sexist comments, to stop the person in their tracks by saying something sexist, hopefully educating them and putting them on the spot without escalating the situation any further. It does that in a gamified way. So you have your little cat avatar that you can grow up to a dragon. There's a community of people that you can connect with. You can add your own comebacks to the sexist comments. And this whole thing is designed to, you know, make fighting social injustices fun, basically. It's all this, you know, really, this is an app to have fun, make an impact in the world, and, you know, really take action, basically. It also has a second feature, which we call like the Imposter Buster, where it helps you build confidence as well, that you have the confidence to go out there and tackle these injustices by helping you collect moments that you're proud of and reminding you of them. So I'm very, very excited to be launching Comeback Cats.
That sounds really fun. I would love to try that. Can you tell our listeners when it's going to be out, where they can access it?
Yes, absolutely. So we have the goal for March is to get 1,000 people on our waiting list, because we're really so close to launching. So you please do, if you're listening, go to comebackcats.com. So that's comeback cats with a Z, comebackcats.com. And you can put yourself on the waiting list there. You can also look us up on LinkedIn, Instagram, or TikTok as well, Comeback Cats with a Z.
All right, great. That sounds really interesting. I am going to go and check it out as soon as we're done with this. But before we go, tell us a little bit about your experiences working across the world. I'm sure that you've had so many diverse experiences and learned so much, but is there a particular story that you'd really like to share with our listeners today? Something that really stands out, or something that really inspired you?
Yeah, many people, beautiful people that I met in my work. I would say that there's one particular person or story in that sense that really stands out and deeply inspired me, and is his name is Abalo. So when I was in West Africa, I had a mission to Togo, in the north of Togo. So I flew there, drove up to assess for a grant of the UN to assess this orphanage in the northern part of Togo. And I was welcomed with open arms. It was such a beautiful facility. The director, you know, I'm still in contact with him up to this day. He, you know, just a wonderful place where they take in children that were cast out, and other horrific human rights abuses happen that I don't really want to go into in this podcast, and take them in and look after them, give them a place to stay, give them food, and give them education. And so after this wonderful day that I spent in this compound, and just really happy to meet these wonderful people doing such wonderful work, I was literally on my way out, and I saw this little boy like half hiding and waving. So I waved back, and I'm like, oh, hi, you know, who are you? And the director turns to me and goes, he's deaf mute. He doesn't understand. And I'm like, okay, can you know, I just kind of waved and tried to sign, you know, like hello and goodbye. And I left. And thanks to a documentary that I had seen a few years ago on Channel 4 about this Ugandan boy, Patrick, I knew that the situation this boy in Togo, Abala, was in is way more isolating than would meet the eye. He seemed like happy, he's in this community and he's really looked after. But this documentary, and I can really recommend watching it. It's on Channel 4. You can look up Patrick Uganda Deaf Mute on Google and you can find it. And it shows this journey of this young boy who is born deaf mute and in the rural part of Uganda. And, you know, when we're born in, like I was, you know, you grew up in Europe or you grew up in a lot of places, if you're deaf mute, you go to a deaf mute school, you learn the sign languages, your family learns the sign language, etc., and you can communicate with the world. It's different, but you can. If you're born in a rural part of Togo like this and you're, you know, cast out, most likely because of your disability, you don't learn to sign. And if you don't learn to sign, you're completely isolated from the entire world around you. You cannot speak. And this documentary follows this young man, and you see the shame on his face at the beginning, and he just is hurting. And they then follow his journey into a school that was set up to learn sign language. And by the end of it, you just see how he's learned to communicate with the world around him and just the difference that it makes. And so seeing Abalo in this orphanage in northern Togo, I connected the dots, and I knew that he needs specific help. So I went back home and I Googled deaf mute schools in Togo. I reached out to multiple ones. I found one that also takes in, so finds family that takes in the students. I fundraised with my friends and family to pay for his education. And so he was then placed in a family to learn how to sign. And that's, for me, was to this day such an important moment, because it just shows, you know, we feel so insignificant in the world, and it shows that one small action can change the course of someone's life. It doesn't need to be putting someone in a school in northern Togo. It can be, you know, treating people that you meet with respect. A smile might not be able to change the world, but it can change someone's world. So making sure that every interaction that you have in this world counts.